palace fit for a tsar, lavishly constructed by Italian architects at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars, its gates crowned by an imperial eagle. This newly built mansion on Russia's Black Sea Riviera has all the facilities the country's ruler might require, including a landing pad with space for 3 helicopters. But officially, it belongs to an obscure private company. But who is it for? Efforts by campaigners to break through security and penetrate the palace grounds have only deepened a mystery that's been tantalizing Russians. Was it built as a personal retreat for their modern-day Tsar Vladimir Putin, about to start a 3rd term as president? And is it yet another example of the corruption many believe is now engulfing the country?
When will it be possible to return?
This is a man who should know. The first insider from Putin's own business circle to blow the whistle on how he says the Russian leader has benefited personally from his position. The Kremlin's denied his allegations, but for several years Sergei Kolesnikov, who now works in the Estonian capital Tallinn, was one of those responsible for building the palace, until he says he pulled out in disgust and fled abroad for his own safety.
I hadn't worked 15 hours a day for 10 years to build a palace. That didn't interest me. I'd spent a huge part of my life trying to do something interesting for Russia.
This transfer for more than $10 million.
These are the records of payments overseen by Kolesnikov to an overseas company belonging to friends of Putin that financed the palace. He alleges that much of the money was diverted from charitable donations. The story begins, he says, with Roman Abramovich, now owner of Chelsea Football Club. He was one of several tycoons who gave millions of dollars to upgrade Russian hospitals. Kolesnikov imported the equipment. Also involved were 2 personal friends of Vladimir Putin's, Nikolai Shamalov and Dmitry Garyelov. He says they got the equipment at a discount and, unknown to the donors, transferred some of the savings into offshore companies at the suggestion of Vladimir Putin himself. Much of it was invested on Putin's instructions in needy Russian industries, but not all. The Kremlin had a pet project of its own.
At the beginning of 2005, they said there was a nice piece of land on the Black Sea where a small house could be built for relaxation. But the original scheme, and this is clear in our contract with the Department of Presidential Affairs, was for just $14 million. A small house with a swimming pool, nothing more.
But today that little retreat that his company helped finance covers a whole mountainside. An environmental activist called Suren Gazarian wanted to discover who'd destroyed protected forest to build such a huge complex. Officially, it belonged to a private company owned partly by Putin's friend Nikolai Shamalov. The activists, assumed to be workmen, got right up to the palace before they were spotted by private security. Then they were approached by other guards, with badges more usually seen around the Kremlin.
There were employees of the Federal Guard Service whose job is to protect the highest state officials. They were even in uniform. They showed us their official IDs, so there was no sign that it was a private house.
So whose palace is it really? Newsnight set off to investigate. Through a snowy landscape that became steadily more impassable. Unlike Putin, we didn't have the advantage of a helicopter. The palace, we think, is a further 20 or 30 kilometres down this road, but the snow's getting too deep for us to continue. We thought we'd be stopped by the secret police, but in the end, we've simply been stopped by the Russian winter. But Sergei Kolesnikov saw the palace many times as it was being built. He says it was his job to discuss with Kremlin officials how best to implement Putin's wishes. But he and his partner, Putin's friend Shamalov, were beginning to fall out.
В конце 2008 года как раз возник финансовый кризис, At the end of 2008 came the financial crisis. Many of our investment projects needed extra money. When I asked Putin, he promised to provide it, but he didn't. Then Shamalov told me the decision was to stop our other projects and put all the money into the palace.
By the end of 2009, Kolesnikov had left Russia. He sent an open letter to President Medvedev accusing Putin, then Prime Minister, of corruption. The Kremlin said it had nothing to do with the palace. But a journalist on one of Russia's few opposition newspapers obtained documents that back up Kolesnikov's story, the agreement to build the palace on state-owned land.
It was very important for us to find the documents to prove that the land was sold to the company which belonged to Putin's friends. Kozhin, who is the head of the Department of Presidential Affairs, he denied that, well, I don't know about the story and I never signed any documents, and here is the document with his signature. This showed us that he lied.
That still doesn't prove the palace was meant for Putin himself, but there is circumstantial evidence.
It's also the building of a road direct to the palace on government money, a high-power electric line direct to the palace, a gas supply. The government spent tens of millions of dollars on these. If this was just for Putin's friend Shamalov, why would the Federal Guard Service commission and monitor the building of the palace? Why would Shamalov need 3 helipads? A private person doesn't need these, but for a president, they're essential.
The implication's clear. An elaborate scheme planned over many years to give Putin a private palace on public money, without his name appearing on a single document. But Kolesnikov's claims can't all be proved. There's no clear evidence that charity funds were diverted. As for his former partners, Putin's friends, Shamalov and Gorelov, their companies say they're not available for comment. Meanwhile, the environmental campaigners tried without success to stroll along the palace beach last summer. By then, the owners were another private company, less closely connected with Putin. But was that just a smokescreen?
I think it's so that this property can't later be returned to the government, because clearly the man that this place really belongs to feels he may lose power, and then by law this residence will go to the next president if it still belongs to the Kremlin. But if it's private, it can't be touched.
Outside the activist's house, we saw secret police lurking. They know his campaign to protect the environment is becoming increasingly political. They've been watching him since he protested against the alleged corruption of both local and national leaders at the holiday home of the regional governor on the Black Sea coast. The governor is believed by some to have helped Putin choose the site for his palace. But when Newsnight met him, he denied the Kremlin chief had any private rest home at all.
As far as I know, the President and the Prime Minister have official residences in Sochi. They were built in Stalin's time. They receive guests there, spend their summer holidays, although even during their holidays they're always working. So they're government residences, and they've got nothing else, as far as I know.
Vladimir Putin will soon return to his presidential office in the Kremlin. He's been re-elected with an overwhelming majority. He'll be governing what the campaigning group Transparency International says is by far the most corrupt of the world's leading states, level with Nigeria, 48 places below India. But there'll need to be a few more whistleblowers from within these solid walls before much begins to change.